Join me, Mark Windows, with Tony Hurst for Windows on the World Live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT at autonomousmedia.net.
Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome to Windows on the World Live from the Thames Estuary and somewhere a little bit further up the Thames as well today, because we've got a special guest on tonight. Well, he's a regular on Windows on the World, but the first time on Windows on the World Live radio show. So we're going to say welcome to Piers Corbyn and welcome to Mark Windows. How you doing, Mark? We'll start off with you. How's your week been?
Fine, Tony. Really good. And we've just put this video up, put it up yesterday on Windows on the World YouTube and, of course, the windowsontheworld.net, called Free Speech Banned at the Green Gathering. And it's gathering pace. It's got quite a few thousand hits already. And understandably, people are quite annoyed about it because of what's happened, and we're going to go into that tonight. It's quite an interesting story and ties in really to what we've been talking about since the start of this series, Tony.
Yeah, I've noticed the responses from that, and brilliant reading of your email in the pod that you put up there, in that recording that you did with Piers, because I'm really pleased that people have got to hear and understand what was actually said there, because it will be a big surprise to a lot of people, although reading the comments on YouTube there's quite a lot of them been made already. A lot of people were well aware of kind of where they were coming from anyway, so it is an interesting subject and it can lead us into all sorts of directions that are linked to everything that we've done up to this point.
I think we should probably explain to the listener, Tony, if they're not aware of this. Basically, myself and Piers Corbyn were banned from speaking at the Green Gathering. Me, because they thought that I indulged in sort of conspiracy theories and I wasn't academic enough, even though my talk was based on government documents and policies and known facts. And it was about the shutdown of free speech, ironically. And of course, Piers was talking about climate and the weather, which is his specialist subject, which he's qualified in. So we were rather surprised by this because we were in a third-party tent at the Green Gathering. So we hadn't been invited by the Green Gathering. We'd been invited by a third party to speak in a tent at the Green Gathering. And we got this email back. It was a friend of ours who runs the tent. And we're going to keep those people anonymous because obviously with this 2025 vision, which is going around music festivals, if people don't know what it is, it's basically all about taxation, carbon tax, and the carbon dioxide scam, which we talk about a lot, and how that is being implemented to take away your basic rights. And in this case, it was about taking away our rights of free speech. Now, we know that in most cases in this country, we don't really have free speech, but we have inalienable rights to express ourselves, even within the framework of the ghastly United Nations Human Rights Act. We are still able to express opinions. Now, this was very interesting because they assumed that my show was about expressing opinions. Well, it's not about expressing opinions. It's about factual analysis of what's actually going on. So I could challenge them on that any day of the week, but under the Human Rights Act and within my alienable rights and my own right to express my own opinion. So they were wrong on both counts. And so me and Piers were banned. We're going to go through why that was. We can read out their email, which is very, very arrogant and very badly put together and makes ridiculous assumptions, which one day will come back and bite them if it hasn't already happened, because people are now actually questioning them. And these are a charitable trust. The people who run the festival, the Green Gathering, are part of a company which is a charitable trust. They have to work for the benefit and in the interests of the public. And banning people like me and Piers, in my view, is not in the interests of the public. It might be in the interests of the lobbyists who back these events, especially this Vision 2025, which is obviously going to get more and more draconian because everyone's going to get dragged into it. So we did a little video up at a small festival called the Harlequin Festival up in Norfolk. And Piers was there. Piers did a talk. I met some great people very interesting people there, including Harry Rhodes with his Cloudbuster, which is something we'll talk about in weeks to come. And we had a great time. It's a small festival, and it's not a police state. And this is the important thing. I think we now have to start looking into these smaller festivals, people getting together, having their own little events, because once you get above a certain number with these festivals, the council interference and the need for security gets greater and greater. And the Green Gathering was originally it was called a Big Green Gathering, and it was originally a really interesting festival, according to friends who went there. I went there a couple of years ago, and I saw all the signs of what's happened to us now. I saw it happening there then. It was all about sustainable development. It was all about transition. It was all about fake green environmentalism. But a lot of the people there aren't aware of that. They're there because it's a festival. But they've noticed that they're not allowed to have as much free speech, or there's more and more regulation, and there's more and more carbon taxation kind of issues getting into it. In other words, we have to be promoting the turkeys voting for Christmas theory, which is the way I put it now, because a lot of these people who are mentored into this don't understand what it's really about. They're fanatic environmentalists, and now that's not a bad thing, because we're fanatic environmentalists, but they've been led completely up the garden path, and to a frightening degree. And this is, of course, how extremist movements start. And the environmental movement is, in my view now, an extremist movement, equally as bad, if not as bad, as Antifa. Yeah, and these fake groups that are being funded by Soros to attack people who have a different viewpoint than their own. And the fake environmentalism is brought into every aspect of our lives, as we're going to talk about tonight. So maybe I should introduce Piers now, Tony.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good time. And,
Okay, yes. Well, my experience of being excluded from the Green Gathering was quite a shock. And, of course, their attitude is entirely different to the attitude with which we were met when we went to the Harlequin Festival, where I gave a talk, which is controversial to some, about the nature of the role of carbon dioxide and so forth. But nevertheless, we had a conversation, and in generally speaking, people welcome what I say because they hadn't heard it before. But that's the important thing, whether people agreed in advance or not. In my opinion, the Green Movement, so far as it's anything, does support the principle of free speech. Whereas the Green Gathering, or some of them who are in charge of the Green Gathering, have a fixed agenda which they want to impose on people. And this agenda puts the belief of problems caused by carbon dioxide ahead of everything, and that is used to dictate all sorts of things, including terms of debate, where they find that some people are speaking, in fact, scientific truth, which they get upset about. Now, whether or not it's the truth is one thing, but, to suppress the debate is completely contrary to the principles on which the Green Movement, if you like, was founded. Certainly the festival movements, because I remember in the 70s being involved in resistance in Stonehenge to get gatherings established as a right, and also, of course, building the squatting movement, which was the fundamental basis in terms of numbers, which made these green gatherings and fights possible, which resulted now in lots of festivals around the country.
Yeah, I think you did really well back there, Piers. You set the stall, and you've done a lot of work that made all of this possible, like you say. But I see parallels here with what's happening at the festivals, and it has been happening for a long time. It's not a short change what's happened here, because way back in my day when I used to go to festivals, we got festivals like the Strawberry Fair, and lots of small little ones that you'll probably remember. And what that happened is they get bigger and bigger, and then they get taken over at a certain point. Like Mark was saying, the councils get involved and all sorts of other authorities get involved.
Well, that's right, yeah. At some point... Sorry, carry on.
Well, it then becomes something completely different to what it was before, and we see this same thing with software, believe it or not. We see the same thing with social media platforms, we see the same thing with different businesses and industries. As soon as they get to a certain size, something bigger comes in, takes it over, and completely transforms it into something that it never was. And in doing that, what they do is they take all that power and all of the input that people have had in growing whatever that thing was, and they just destroy it. They literally, I was nearly going to swear there, but we don't do that on this show. But they really do screw people over. Those that built it into what it was.
They become money operations, don't they? It's a follow the money thing. You remember?
The thing with the Green Gathering is very interesting, Piers, because it did used to be a much more open festival, and at some point, I was being told this the other day, it was taken over, really, in the respect that the police wanted more and more control in there, and they gave the people a huge bill for the policing and security, and then it was never the same again. And now there's a slot there, and to me, their response is the way they've spoken to us, which is going to hit them back. You know, they're trying to be really arrogant about it still, saying that we don't have to tell you anything. Well, I'm afraid you do. You're a charitable trust. You are there for the benefit of the public, and you have to work in the interests of the public. This is part of your charitable status. So these people are acting against their own status as a charitable trust.
They are,
They are not acting as trustees, because trustees have an oath of office. These people have an oath. I became a trustee of a charitable trust recently, and I take it extremely seriously. Now, the thing is that what I've noticed is even the Charity Commission, they don't really seem to enforce things or take things up. There's been people trying to destroy the trust that I'm part of, and the thing is that this all comes from taking an oath of office. Now, these people are in office, so that brush-off email that they sent, which was totally patronising and incredibly insulting, is not the work of a trustee of a charitable trust. And
no, I agree. They're certainly overstepping their mark, you know.
So where do you go with that then? They've overstepped the mark there. They're obviously not got any legal grounds to do what they're doing. In fact, the opposite.
Before we do that, I think it's just worth looking back at the origin of all these movements in the in the 70s. If anything, you see, people didn't go down to Stonehenge thinking, I'm a green person, you know what I mean? And we didn't go fighting for having the right to have a carnival in Notting Hill to be green. It was basically an expression movement, if you like, and people wanted to talk about new ways of running society and new ways of relating to each other. And these things have been changed in the course of time since then into money-making operations, and an ideology has been introduced called green ideology, which is used to impose and control. For example, Glastonbury used to be a really open sort of fun thing. Now, it still is an open, fun thing, don't get me wrong, but it's extremely expensive to go there now. I mean, it's become a money operation. And the green agenda is imposed on it as an ideology, largely. Things like the Notting Hill Carnival have now, instead of being, we were against the riots there, people had to riot in order to make it happen, and the police arrested loads of people. Then the authorities decided, better let it happen and have kind of democratic setups to run it, which was fine. But now it's become so control from above. Authorities have even been talking this year about moving the Notting Hill Carnival out of Notting Hill. Well, I ask you, is this real? I mean, how can the Notting Hill Carnival not be held in Notting Hill? But they're saying because of Grenfell Tower or something, they want to do that. But this is, of course, complete nonsense. I mean, you don't need to do that because of Grenfell Tower. In fact, I would say all the more because of Grenfell Tower, you parade in the whole area for people to have mutual support. But you see what I'm saying? That overall, there is a movement against free expression and of control, and the ideology used is the green ideology, the definitions of which are defined not by people but by the CO2 control agenda.
Absolutely.
And the globalists, you know.
I was there a couple of years ago, Piers, at the Green Gathering, and I had my van parked right near the entrance where you go in, because I knew that I wasn't going to stay for the whole duration. So I camped there, and I usually go in with people who are the crew. So in a way, you're kind of privileged in that respect, because you are allowed a bit more leeway with what you do. You know, you can have your vehicle in there, you've got your own little bit, and that's really great. But when I had to leave the Green Gathering to go down to the shop with a friend, I knew it was going to be aggravation. I just knew it. And she said, no, be all right. So we jumped in the van. It took us nearly 2 hours to get back in. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing here is this petty-mindedness, that they get these people in who are mentored into this agenda. We're going to talk about that quite broadly tonight, and how it's at every single level, because over the years I've been talking about these change agents and change agent groups. They're mentored into the same mentality. So the idea is of the United Nations Agenda 2030 is that nobody is going to be left behind. It means if you're like us, then you will be extinguished. That's what it actually means by being left behind. It means you're not just going to be a minority view. It means you will not have a view. It's there to extinguish that view. So this kind of thing done in the name of green and environmentalism is an absolute joke, because the people behind it must be laughing at the gullibility of these trained monkeys they've got enforcing it. It's very clever. It's incredibly clever, but it's not that clever when you work it out, because when you see how this psychological subversion stuff works, so me and Tony have been talking about this for about 8 or 9 weeks now, on and off, with the odd break, but maybe the odd coffee break, but not many others. It's been mainly the same kind of thing, because this is what we're seeing everywhere. We're seeing this shutdown, this consensus, and what's happened to us here, people may think it's a trivial thing, but it's not, because we're coming from 2 different directions, really, although we meet on a lot of the same things, and we oppose what people are putting over. But my talk was really about psychology, psychological subversion, and the training of people who have been mentored into the mentality that actually blocked my talk, which is really, really interesting. And yours was, I thought they dealt with you in such a patronising manner. I'll just go into this email, Piers, that they sent. I'm not going to...
Okay, why not? Do that, and then we ought to do that video we did down at the...
Yes, when we can go into the interview one we did at the Real Festival, not the Green Gathering. So it says here, right, while they're talking about basically the platforms, and they say one of the key objectives of the charity is education for sustainability and transition. Well, they're 2 words that should make everyone's alarm bell go off, They're meaningless, but they mean they've been mentored into this new globalist agenda. It carries on. While that may encompass many viewpoints, speakers on human impact on climate change denial and conspiracy theories regarding some well-established international environmental policy initiatives undermine the educational objectives of the charity and the event. Now, this is interesting, because we need to see what their basically body of the charity is about, because in their articles of incorporation, because they're a limited company as well, I think, they'll have articles of incorporation. But with the charitable side, they have to tell you what the aims and objectives of the trust are, and the trust has to work for the benefit of the public. So they're on very dodgy ground here, I think, with what they're saying, because they're saying that we're dealing in conspiracy theories. Well, we're not. That's absolutely untrue. And they're calling it climate change denial.
Well, yeah, now, which is completely poppycock, because
weaponized language. It's the weaponized language of the psychological subversive, and that's what they're using now. I'll just carry on, Piers, and then you can respond to this.
Yeah, sure. No, you carry on.
They haven't given you or me chance to respond. We have responded, but they haven't responded to our response. So It carries on. Well,
and they haven't published our response on their sites either, have they?
Well, I've published their response on our YouTube
channel. Yeah, I know that. Okay.
While Piers' position is well documented, it is regarded as a particularly minority view in comparison with the consensus of the IPCC and the scientific community. Hold yourself back, Piers. Mark's views clearly lack academic rigour and neither appropriate education. There are other activities, etc., at the Green Gathering that lack academic vigour, but these are counterintuitive to the whole Green Gathering mission. Now, it's gobbledygook. These people can't even articulate themselves properly. Therefore, we are taking the unusual action of requesting that you withdraw the invitation to those speakers. And then they go on to say, we don't intend either to micromanage any area content or heresy, but on this occasion, directors and trustees concerned that the subjects and their promotion are just too counterintuitive to the GG core mission. Take an interest in Jeremy's less famous brother and also risk damaging publicity in mainstream media, which may take an interest in Jeremy's less famous brother with a view to embarrassing both the Labour Party and the Green Gathering. Well, I think that the Green Gathering have embarrassed themselves now. This is what's going to come home to them. I think, though, as trustees, these people have to be questioned. We need to know, and we can go to the Charity Commission and find out who the trustees are, because when I became a trustee recently, my name is printed on the internet as a trustee, and that means that people can attack you personally, and that's what they've done to our venue in North London. So these people are laying themselves open to being scrutinised, and I think that's what people out there need to do, because if we can take down this kind of fascism, it could be a very good step, and it may even return things to people who are really more eligible to be trustees than the people who have written to us.
Yes. Well, that's good points there. I would say that the thing about Jeremy, my brother, is ridiculous there. You see, he used to be my brother, now I'm his brother.
Oh, yeah, of course.
but then, of course, so what? I mean, what has this got to do with anything?
It's what it shows, Piers, is that
they've got nothing to say. I mean, yeah, I dare say, well, lots of people have brothers who are either more or less well-known than the people concerned, but that doesn't mean anything about the validity of what they say.
It's almost like they've hooked themselves into the cult of celebrity on one level, but on the other level, they've decided that you shouldn't be associated with their idea of what the Labour Party is.
Yeah, but anyway, of course, my brother knows what I'm doing, you know, and Jeremy's in favour of free speech and debate, so there's no way he's going to welcome them suppressing me and he on climate matters, and he knows very well what I'm saying anyway. He's always supported debate, and I regard myself as one of the well, a lot of people say one of the torchbearers of the expression movement. I mean, I was arrested over 40 times in the 70s and 80s doing various things in housing and squatting and so forth. But I think the point about the minority view on climate change is also completely irrelevant. First of all, they say we're climate change denial people. Well, hang on. I don't deny climate change at all. The climate is always changing. Yeah, we put that in the response. What we're saying is the causes of changes in climate are not what they say. And in fact, carbon dioxide levels are an effect of changes in climate, not a cause of changes in climate. And we demonstrated that very well in the talks, and people can go on to weatheraction.com and see the arguments. And then they have this idea that if it's a minority view, it should be suppressed. Well, hang on. This is eco-fascism. And it's anti-science, because as a matter of fact, nothing was ever advanced in science by the consensus. The consensus is always what has gone before, and science advances when the consensus is broken. Now, me and others are breaking this consensus on the CO2 matter, and in a few years we will be proved completely right. as the world gets colder and the accountability movement, if you like, rises up and says, look, enough is enough. We have to have evidence-based science and accountability in science and politics.
Absolutely, and I think it's great in a way that this has come up because they've given us so much ammunition here, and if they'd have let us speak there, maybe 40, 50 people would have attended each talk if we were lucky. Yeah. We've got thousands of people talking about it now. So,
some of that 40 or 50 might have got upset, maybe 10 of them, but so what, you know? Yes.
I know, the point is that I think this is counterintuitive to their mission, don't you, Piers?
Oh, it's absolutely. Yeah. But it's interesting how it is, you know, it's against free expression and it's against science, as was understood by, you know, people up until the 70s and 80s. I would say absolutely. When I was in Imperial College, evidence was the way forward. Now, with these people and a lot of the mainstream academia, evidence is not the way forward. It's political correctness, as defined by somebody else, is the way forward. Now, that can't be right. This has to be stopped.
Absolutely. Maybe we should go to that podcast now, Tony, and come back after that. Have a little break.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll start that right now then. Cheers, fellas.
Join me, Mark Windows, with Tony Hurst for Windows on the World Live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT at autonomousmedia.net. Welcome to Windows on the World. We're at the Harlequin Fair, which is in Norfolk, and Piers Corbin has been given a talk here on his usual subject, weather and the climate. I'm Mark Windows, as you know, and interestingly, both myself and Piers were banned from speaking at the Green Gathering. Now, we're going to talk a bit about that today because we had a very long email from them, and we've responded to it point by point, both of us individually and together in an email, and we've had no response from the Green Gathering. They've gone very quiet. They stated that Piers' view was a minority view, and also that my own talk, which was called The Post-Truth World, wasn't welcome there. Ironically, my talk is about the shutting down of free speech, and free speech has been shut down at the Green Gathering. So, Piers, you've done a talk here on your usual subject, which was very well received. Now, tell us a bit about what you think of this decision by the Green Gathering.
Well, the decision by the Green Gathering came as quite a shock. I mean, the Green Gathering is held in Chepstow every year, gets lots of people, and you'd think it'd be a bit like the Harlequin Fair here up in Norfolk. And here it's very welcoming. Some people disagreed with what I said, but, you know, most of them actually agreed with what I said, but had a sensible, intelligent.
Well, you could have a debate over it, couldn't you? That's the whole point. The reason that you open it up for questions at the end is for people to challenge what you're saying. Now, we weren't given that choice. We weren't given that choice, were we? We weren't allowed to put our point of view over. Now, this infringes our human rights under Articles 9 and 10 of the Human Rights Act. So, what have you got to say about that?
Well, I think that is true. And I said in my note to them, along with your note, or letter, let's call it, that what they're doing on the Green Gathering runs completely against the principles on which these fairs were set up in the 70s and 80s. Because I remember friends of mine going to Stonehenge, getting arrested en masse just to have the right to have some celebration around Midsummer's Day. And I joined into these things. I didn't get arrested on the fields. I got arrested in squatting. And the squatting movement of those days was 110% behind these protests at Stonehenge, you know. So I was providing a base of people who made these fairs possible, right? And yet now they're turning around as if they are the new policemen.
Yeah, so you're...
It is completely unacceptable from any of the principles involved in these green movements. And in my opinion, they're splittist. They're trying to split off the people who actually want rational discussion about green issues. And I made the point in the tent here, in the Harlequin Fair, that what we're seeing is a conflict of true green which is what me and others and yourself represent, Mark, versus fake green, which means believing in man-made climate change, which is putting up electricity prices, or it means building huge dams in the Amazon to produce electricity, but destroying all those tribes and the nature in the Amazon. I mean, that is a big choice. Yet they are defending the, to me, wrongdoers.
Well, you've been an activist for a very long time, you see, as you just said, and it must come as a shock to you, because even at Speaker's Corner was set up, basically, originally, where you said your last words before you were hung, but you still had the right to say them. Now, what these green police, or these people, basically what it is, they're into an agenda called Festival 2025, and what they're trying to do is put sustainability and transition at their core values. Now, what they're actually saying here is the shutdown of anything which goes against the man-made climate change myth and the CO2 taxation scam. And we can say with some authority that that's what they are, because we've both looked into them. Piers has been doing this for many, many years, and he has the qualifications. The interesting thing that they said that Windows on the World lacked academic vigour, not even rigour. I thought we were quite vigorous, you see. So in the email, they're saying I'm not vigorous, which I deny that completely. And what we've done is we've got a point-by-point rebuttal, which we're going to put into this show, so you can have a bit of a laugh about that and what they said. But they haven't come back to us with any response whatsoever, so they've gone very quiet. Now, if this is the future of festivals, then it means that free speech is going to be a thing of the past, even at events like this, which is a great event we're at today. We're up in Norfolk at a thing called the Harlequin Fair, and it has quite a few different stages. There's circus things here. There's a lot of kids, as Piers found out this morning.
Right. Yeah.
We got woken up by the kids. But the thing is that this is a little independent festival, so it's outside the grasp of this Festival 2025 vision, which is going to all the bigger festivals. So you're going to find this at Glastonbury and all the rest of the places, and it's going to start coming in more and more like a police state control system, which we're having this free speech shut down. It's quite scary. We've had it through the anti-terror laws, and now the Climate Change Act and all the rest of it is coming into play, and we're going to be speaking on very, very limited topics. Now here we've got many topics. We've got things like surveillance and smart cities. We've got talks on lots of different things. Now the talks that we were going to be attending, there was some kind of mystical stuff. There was all sorts of very good kind of broad spectrum of things. Now what they're doing is they're narrowing down all options, and we've all got to be sustainable and transition, you see. It's always about transition and sustainability, these words that we see everywhere. Now, what do you think, though, Piers, about this as the future? Because these smaller festivals, if this happens to these, it's going to be no fun at all, is it?
No, it'll be no fun at all. I mean, as you can see on the sign, the full title of my talk here was "It's the Sun, Not CO2 What Does It? True green versus fake green and the future of the world." And, you know, we had a real good discussion. But you see, the green gathering people don't want that discussion. They definitely don't want that discussion. They have a one world order view, which they pretend they don't have, but they do have, because when people come forward to talk about it, they try and shut them down. I mean, I also pointed out that actually I have serious green credentials, in the sense that when I was a councillor in the 86 to 90 in Southwark, I was the councillor responsible for setting up an enterprise board involving the private sector to start the combined heat and power station on the Southwark Lewisham Greenwich boundary, and that burns all the rubbish in Southwark now and makes it into electricity. Now, you know, that is a green credential, but I did that to stop waste. I mean, I wasn't thinking of CO2, because CO2 actually is the gas of life. You know, but for them, they would probably support that because of CO2. But of course, it still produces CO2 anyway, because it comes out the chimney. But it stops waste. I mean, that's good. But I think the point to make is there is something going on here, and Mark has hit the nail on the head, right? The phrases they use, sustainability and the like, are suppression. We have to fight for accountability in science and politics. We have to fight for the right to discuss anything, and we have to oppose the carbon tax and tax rises, and as you may or may not know, 25% of what you pay in electricity and gas now goes straight to subsidising wind farms and other bird-killing machines is what they are, and various other scams in the energy industry. Now, there should be alternative energy sources tried, absolutely, all the time. But to impose them on people at higher cost, I think is wrong. And I think those Guardian readers, for the sake of a description, who believe in the righteousness of wind farms, they should pay electricity prices as if all their electricity comes from wind farms unsubsidised, right? And then they would see their electricity bills double or treble. And let us see, what they think. Because why should we, who don't have, roofs which we can get solar panels on or so on, pay to subsidise these other people to get cheap electricity? If they believe in it, pay for themselves, have a price structure. So if you want to pay for, coal-powered electricity, then you pay for that. And that will be a lower cost. And there has to be a rule to make sure that the smoke is removed, absolutely. And in England, that is the case. That was my answer. I would like the right to not have to buy nuclear, wind farm or solar power.
So yes, this green energy agenda, it really needs explaining properly, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. What they're doing is imposing things which are expensive, but they're not actually even good the way they're done. You see, when you have a wind farm, if the wind doesn't blow in the midwinter when it's very cold, high pressure, you've got to bring in other sources, which you can ramp up a coal-fired power station, but there's a limited number of them. And what they're doing primarily now is bringing in massive diesel activity all over the country. And this is causing diesel pollution. And this is not good at all. It's actually bad. And other times in the summer, when the wind is like more controllable or whatever, or even the solar power, and then they ramp down the coal-fired power stations, again, that is an inefficient use of resources because the coal-fired power station's wasting. So, you see, half the time the wind farms can blow and half the times they can't. And this type of energy production is inefficient. But I would say about solar power in general that the future of energy in the country within 50 years may be that really cheap solar power will be developed. Now, there is issues involved in getting the metals out of the ground that are used for the solar power and the large pollution involved in that is true. There's a lot of issues about battery production, but solar power could be an answer. But right now, it's not. It's ruining fields and reducing agricultural production where they have turned the field over to solar power, and it is expensive, and it shouldn't be imposed on it. It should be kept as an experimental thing. And on the electricity matter, those people who think that electric cars are the future should look at the actual facts. To produce a battery for an electric car produces the same amount of CO2 as then running an ordinary car on average for 8 years. And this CO2 is produced up front before you've done any driving. So the actual CO2 production of electrified cars is bigger than sticking to petrol. Now, it's sold to you under the guise of saving the planet. It's not saving any planet. It's making a lot of money for the big corporations behind this so-called green story.
Yes, and also it's restricting your rights to travel because electric cars can only go about 95 miles before a recharge.
And they're damned expensive. I can't afford it. I've got an old Vauxhall Cavalier, right? Well,
this is the point, though, Piers, that all of these old vehicles, they have to pass the emissions test, the same one as the new vehicles. So basically, what they're doing is they're taking away our rights of travel. That's what this is really about. So all those people at the Green Gathering, as I said earlier, Turkey's voting for Christmas, and thanks for the publicity, and we won't see you next year. Join me, Mark Windows, with Tony Hurst.
Right, there you go. I think there'll be a lot of people that are quite surprised about what you were saying there, Piers, about the electric cars and a fair few other things as well as...
Sure. Well, the electric car story is actually even worse than I said there because... Yeah, to spell it out. First of all, to get the electric car to drive, to move, you're going to have to already produce 8 years' worth of a normal car's CO2. The second thing is, to carry it on driving, you're actually essentially having a coal-fired steam car. because the electricity that drives the car comes mostly from a coal-fired power station. That's where 80 or 90% of our electricity comes from. And the coal-fired production of energy is much less efficient than the internal combustion engine, because of the temperature of the setup, and the coal-fired power station produces about 40% efficiency of energy. You might reuse the heat energy as well, so it might be better than that in some respects. But then on top of that, you charge a battery, and the wastage in that is very large. Well, a battery is probably, I think, 50% efficient. It could be 60, but the point is when you multiply those together, 0.4 times 0.5, you get to 0.2, 40% being the efficiency of a coal-fired power station. Whereas that's 20%, whereas a petrol car might be 80%. So that's 4 times different. And the other thing is, of course, when you're burning coal, you're making CO2 straight from the coal. Whereas when you burn petrol, you have a hydrocarbon. You're making carbon dioxide and water. So the amount of CO2 produced by the petrol engine per amount of energy produced is less. So in the end, you probably got 5 times more CO2 being produced by an electric car than you do by having a normal petrol car. I mean, certainly somewhere between 3 and 5 times. Well, that is, not green in their sense. It's a rip-off.
Wow, that's pretty shocking statistics. And one of the comments in our chat room is, "Can we stop talking about CO2?" Well, not until it's sorted.
Until everybody else does.
Yeah, when people stop telling lies about CO2, and they are pretty easily provable as lies to yourself, if you do a little bit of investigation into history and what we've found in ice samples and other methods of measuring CO2 in the past, and the genetic structure of plants and their ability to absorb far more CO2 because that's what they used to do in the past. It's all there. It's quite simple stuff. And so is reading a graph. It was one of the first things I learned to do in the infant school. So if you can read a graph for yourself, you don't have to take some third party's word for what's going on here. You really don't.
Quite right.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had some very interesting comments down here, and one of them was about, this was quite interesting. It says, "Windows on the World, FFS. We quit teaching biology and photosynthesis process of all plants after the first Earth Day on the US. In the US, I think the first Earth Day, right? Earth Day. So, in other words, all the sense and the science was taken out to start with. That's very, very interesting. That's all part of the agenda. So we can't refer back to common sense. And as far as the talking about CO2 goes, it's incredibly important because this is what they're using to enslave us and take all our money. This is the whole point of what we're talking about is the CO2. We've had some really good comments, so I'll just go back to a few of them before we move on. Now, somebody, this was a great one. This guy called Frank Jones. He says, "Thank you for challenging the self-righteous Green Police, and I have messaged them to this effect on their Facebook page. They should apologise to you for their derogatory email." Okay, so I said, "Thanks. They have failed to respond to us. Their arrogance and stupidity needs exposing." He's gone on. "Their response to me on Messenger was that they weren't sure what I wanted to complain about and was a private conversation." Well, if it's on Facebook Messenger, it is a private conversation, but as they are acting in the public and on behalf of the public, then why are they asking if it's a private conversation? Because everything they say should be termed and presented in the form of a press release. This is what you do if you are part of a charitable trust. You have to put out very, very good, focused answers to the public as though the public were listening to you. It's a bit like being in a criminal case or something. When you write down your testimony, you're not writing it for everybody else out there. You're writing it for the judge. And the thing is, in in their world, the public are the judge and the jury. So they should be really careful what they're saying. And their arrogance is now starting to show through. And so he said, I told them, it isn't a private issue now, as it's on social media. I will be complaining via their email address. They refused to acknowledge they were a charity or should be accountable in any way. What immature, annoying people. Now, these people are digging themselves a massive hole here, as we stated at the beginning of the show. What do you think of all this, Piers?
Well, I think that is absolutely the case they are. I would think the point you made earlier about how they are trying to suppress debate by denying and hiding facts is very important. You see, the United Nations Committee on Climate Change, the UNIPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, basically in 2004 thereabouts, they said, look, CO2 is bad and it's going up. But they did not, in their subsequent reports, show that actually temperatures have not been following CO2 historically, but in fact they've been moving all over the place. And if you look back long enough, you can see clearly that temperatures change first and CO2 levels change later. Or in other words, that CO2 is an effect of changes in climate, not a cause. And this is because the sea, when it's warmed up, will emit CO2, and it holds 50 times more CO2 than the atmosphere. And when it cools down, it can hold more. So when the sun changes the temperature of the oceans, the CO2 later, after circulation issues on deep in the ocean, goes up, and it could be hundreds of years later. So by separating CO2 and temperature, they've hidden the actual facts. And that means that debate is actually prevented. And if you want to get back to science, we have to go back to observation and have evidence-based science.
Well, this takes us back, Piers, to last year when we went to Paris, and we went to an alternative to the COP21, which wasn't attended by very many people, but what a great bunch of speakers. We had Lord Monckton there, we had Patrick Moore, we had quite numerous people, and Niels Axel Morner, of course, one of the world's leading experts in sea levels, and we've done several shows with Niels since, and people still repeat this mantra that sea levels are rising, and he just says, well, no, they're not. I mean, it depends where you are, but they're not going to rise meters. That wouldn't have happened even after the Ice Age.
Well, land falls down, of course, as well.
Yes, this is what he's saying, that these Pacific islands are built on coral. If you build on top of them, then it will sink. So it's kind of an easy thing to look into once you understand it. But people repeat these mantras, don't they? The CO2 thing, it's repeated. Some people have come in the comments here and started to put that sort of thing in. Very few, actually, to be fair. There's only one or two out of about 60 or 70 comments. But we've really opened up a very interesting debate here, and that was the whole idea of this. Some people might think this is trivial, but it's not. It exposes the whole thing. So that conference I was just talking about, the one, the follow-on, actually, from the one in Paris, was originally going to be at UCL. And the professor who booked the room at UCL, who was a lecturer there, had the conference pulled, and it was a conference about the climate. So this is what's happening. That anything with a contrary view to this global consensus on world government, global taxation, global control, is being completely undermined at best and shut down in a very draconian way, much worse, actually, than in 1984. Because it's now so overt, you couldn't make it up. And what they're coming back with is worse than newspeak. It's much worse than that. The language has been completely weaponized against anybody who has something to say. But they have limited tactics, and this is what we keep banging on about, because once you bust their template, that's it. it's like bursting a balloon. There's nothing else there.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I would recommend everyone should reread George Orwell's 1984, which has got stuff in there about the manipulation of language to prevent people thinking. And of course, you know, these phrases, sustainability and so forth, or regeneration when it comes to social cleansing, which is going on big time in all the cities, that is used to manipulate people. And I think your point about University College London suppressing free speech even after a conference had been booked is abominable, because University College London was set up as a non-religious university years ago when all the others were religious, or most of them. Yet they closed down a discussion. Now, even Imperial College, where I went, did not close down discussion when we had our Climate Fools Day in 2008. In fact, you know, I did raise the issue with the authorities, said, look, you know, you realise we're different from what you're saying, do you mind? And they said, no, it's okay, Piers, you can have a conference like this, you can have the discussion. So even though a lot of the powers that be disagreed, they welcomed actual use of the buildings on discussion. But now something has changed, and the authorities in University College decided to do a U-turn. Now that is a real landmark and has to be stopped. And I think we should also at some point talk about fake green versus true green. Do you want me to do that now or later on?
I think so, Piers. Yeah, it's a good time to go into that, and then we can go into what's happening with this global governance, because I keep coming across documents generically the same, but more and more 1984. It's going into this global governance objective with just people who are trained into it. There's nobody who's a free thinker allowed into any of these organizations.
Okay, yeah, all right, let's do that in a minute. So right now then, fake green versus true green. I think what you have to do, I mean, anyone's involved in the green movement thinks they're saving the planet. Now, that's a fine thing to do, save the planet and stop waste and so forth. But any of these issues, you ought to have a look behind what is going on. I mean, basically, what I call the fake green is use the theory that CO2 is driving climate change as the big thing for everything, and then use that to justify all sorts of things. In the case of electric cars, as I just explained, their argument doesn't work, and you're actually producing more CO2. Now, electric cars are true green in the sense that you're making less smoke pollution in a city. That is fine. And I'm in favour of making less smoke in a city. But, of course, modern petrol cars can actually produce pretty clean exhaust by catalytic converters and so forth. So that's the electric issue. On the issue of wind, well, it's not free. Wind power isn't free any more than coal power is free, because you have to use work to get the metals out of the ground to make the wind turbines and dig the coal. The bad thing about wind, quite apart from the cost, the wind power, is that it kills birds. And as I said, that it actually needs a coal-fired backup when the wind doesn't blow. But, you know, the killing of birds and the extra expense, to me, rules it out. And it makes it the true green aspect of it, if there is one, is way below the fake green, i.e. the badness of killing birds. The case of the Amazon, where I mentioned in the recording, what's going on there is utterly terrible, because in the name of saving the planet, they're want to build huge dams which will actually destroy the Amazon as it is, kill off the livelihoods of many tribes, and end the vast amount of biodiversity there. Now, that cannot be green in the sense of promoting biodiversity, which for me is one of the fundamental tenets of a true green movement. And what they're going for is some money-spinning operation where the huge corporations rake in the profit by big projects. If you notice, all the fake green things, or nearly all of them, involve very big projects, huge capital spending, big profits for the top dogs in Wall Street. The issue of burning wood, supposedly because it's better than burning coal, and sticking that in power stations is madness, because what we have is great tracts of American basic forest being chopped down, shipped across the Atlantic, burnt in English power stations, and then those forests converted into monoculture or faster growing wood. Well, that is anti-biodiversity, and in terms of transport of wood around is just pretty mad. It will be much better to reopen coal mines in Britain and get the coal out of the ground, and of course remove the smoke from the power stations, which can be done. But I would invite anybody who's looking at a green thing they're doing to think, well, okay, how green is it, and in what sense is it green, and in what sense is it actually benefiting some Wall Street corporation that wants to use that for money or just to control us.
Well, this is a very good point, Piers, because this is where this kind of globalism meets the environmental movement. And a lot of these people, it's turkeys voting for Christmas, just do not get this. They don't get that they're part of a very cleverly thought out structure which uses them because of their particular mindset. It uses people of a particular mindset, and that's what is very clever about it. They're called useful idiots or change agents, and these people that we've been talking about tonight are falling into that bracket. They're arrogant, they're acting beyond their authority, and they're dangerously uneducated about what they're talking about. Yet they are very happy to enforce it in a draconian way. Now, have we heard this before? They're always talking about this was Nazi Germany, but this was also Bolshevism. You know, we're talking about people. We're talking about people who've actually lost their minds here, in my opinion. People might think I'm overstating that, but when you see this at a local level, which is where it's all being played out. We've been to these regeneration meetings. I've been with your peers to that one, the Elephant and Castle, and I think you were shocked by that. You had your hand up saying, let's have ballots, and it was all done by what's called Delphi technique, which is a way of gaining group consensus. And if you noticed, in that email from the Green Gathering, they went on about the scientific consensus. They didn't say that any of what you were saying wasn't true. They just said it went against the consensus. Again, 1984. And in response also to what you were saying there, that video we did at the Green Energy Conference, Green Energy Agenda, Fact and Fiction, it's called that, Green Energy Agenda, Fact and Fiction, on windowsontheworld.net and YouTube. For anybody who wants to know how the green agenda really works, watch that video, because we talked to the people who supply the national grid, didn't we?
We did, and they're producing diesel power big time, at the same time as admitting off the record that diesel fumes are bad for you, worse than petrol car fumes. And of course, petrol cars can be made cleaner than diesel cars, and are cleaner than diesel cars.
Absolutely. So when we talk about this stuff, this is why I was kind of irked by them, really, because they patronized you in a particular way, and they patronized me in a different way. So in other words, they undermined me as though I was just somebody who spouted opinions and who didn't really have any qualification for those opinions. But the qualification for the opinions comes on the researched facts. So it's not about having letters after my name. It's about the attention to detail of the factual analysis of what you're doing, which is called journalism, or used to be called journalism. And I did a journalism course a few years ago with a guy who was a showbiz journalist, but old school. And he taught us how to write news, and there's several ways of writing news, and how the whole thing is done. And that's been completely lost. Within the last 10 years, that's gone. You don't see that anymore. You don't see anybody who can construct a news article properly. So when these people patronise us to this extent, it gets under your skin, and people think we're reacting here. But we need to react to this stuff, because it's not just about us being stopped from speaking. On a very deep, disturbing level, these people are out of control, in my opinion.
Yes, I think they are. Accountability has to be from below, has to be what we go for. I think these concepts around like green fascism and eco-socialism are quite interesting. You see, in the 70s and 80s, people on the left said that nukes are bad and coal is good. And, marched and went to prison for that. Now, they've flipped over and say the opposite. And coal is bad because of CO2 and nukes are good because of lack of CO2. And this has been done in the name of what they call eco-socialism, which seems to me just a way of turning their socialist ideology and backing of trade unions on its head. And the other thing to look at is, of course, what is called green fascism, i.e. the high-handed manner in which these green operatives work. And if you recall Hitler's Germany, Hitler started off by saying he was some sort of socialist, i.e. he said he was a national socialist. Now, of course, he was actually an agent for the biggest corporations there are, but he used something as a cover. And some of these modern green people do certainly act in a fascistic manner, i.e. they suppress debate, suppress expression, and stop democratic accountability. There's a curious coming together of these different concepts: eco-socialism, which is not socialism, I would say, and green fascism, which is a phrase to describe the bad things going on now.
We've got.
Very good. Sorry, Tony, go on.
Can I get in here? We've got Freeman Jack in the chat saying that it's fiat environmentalism, and I think that's quite an apt description. We have got quite a few comments and a few questions here that we're going to go into after our break. We're going to have some music now, or when Mark's finished what it was he wanted to respond to.
Actually, Tony, it's a good time for a break, because I was just going to start going into some of this documentation that I've been looking at, which people I think will find quite scary, but it's all along the same lines as what we've been talking about.
Yep, it goes right out in a spider's web in all directions. I've got a few more things to say myself. Anyway, thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll be back after a tune, maybe two tunes, because they're short ones. This is Deke Jackson and NWO Blues, played with permission of Deke, and you can check out more of his music and his awesome activism videos on YouTube. Cheers, everyone.
Hi, I'm Mark Windows. I use organic web design for all my website, hosting and digital design needs. High quality work, reliable and competitive. Go to organicwebdesign.eu and contact Tony for a free quote.
Okay, so we had two tunes from Deke there. The second one was Stomp Clap, and the first one was NWO Blues, where Deke states that kind of we are the problem and we are the solution. That's something you'll hear me say very often, no doubt. And also the CO2, we're not going to shut up about that either until everybody else gets that. Right, so welcome back, gentlemen. Hope you've got yourself nice and refreshed. We've got some questions and a couple of statements as well. So Stu, who's become a regular now in the chat, which is good to see. We could do with a few more people contributing here. autonomousmedia.net in the chat room button, and you can put your questions to us and join in the other stuff that's going on while we're talking. So Stu says, sustainable development demands the social contract must change, apparently. And I don't know who wants to respond to that, but I'm sure one of you will.
Well, this is very interesting. Yeah, the social contract, this is what we've been hearing. And these terms that they use are so disturbing to me. A social contract. What is that? What does it actually mean? I mean, we're going to go into this in a bit more depth in this second hour with some of these shocking organisations that are set up making these huge assumptions. Yes, when you look into this stuff, which not a lot of many people do, it's interesting that I used to have a next door neighbour in Walthamstow, and I was telling her what was going to happen with all this Mini Holland stuff and what it was really about, and Agenda 21. She goes, oh, I remember Agenda 21, as though she knew what it was about. Well, I said, have you looked into it? It's a huge document, but you have to cherry pick what's in it and what it's actually saying. And now, when I go back to Walthamstow, I sometimes see this lady. She works for the council, and she's genuinely pretty shocked because she's now living in an open concentration camp. And I said, that's what's coming. So to address the thing about the social contract means that your local council is taking more and more control, but it's giving you less and less rights. I think that's what they mean by a social contract. I looked into this several years ago, but it's about the time I was talking to Deborah Tavares in California, and what happened there was really draconian. And then I find out 2 years later, it's all happening here. Everything in the Sustainable Development documents is happening here, including turning Hackney Marshes into a carbon neutral space, right? This is very important stuff. So this social contract thing is exactly what we're talking about. It mentors us in, by assumption, to the aims and objectives of Agenda 21. In other words, we become responsible for getting rid of our own rights. That's what they mean by that.
Yes, and part of what we're saying there about we are the problem and we are the solution is that we are tacitly agreeing to all of this with our silence and by not doing anything about any of it. If you want a different social contract, and one of the anonymous members is saying corporate lingo is what that is, well, yeah, it is corporate lingo, but you need to kind of get your head around what it is and then do something about it.
All
if you don't
corporate
like
lingo. It's all newspeak. It's all 1984. There's nothing in their language that is normal. It's abnormal. That's the thing about it. That's the scary thing about it. And when you start seeing these phrases like sustainability and transition, as in the Green Gathering people, and then you see these robot responses and their complete shut-off and denigration of anything that they are mentored into not dealing with, then you really see their true colours. These people have been changed. That's why they're called change agents. And all this stuff about a social contract and all the rest of it, it's basically about having no rights. That's what UN Agenda 21 is all about. It's about removing all rights for the good of the consensus. And the consensus is that we have to believe in we are a blight on the planet and we have to remove ourselves as quickly as possible. Well, can Al Gore go first, please? Because he's using more energy than anyone on the planet. He seems to be getting more and more fat every time you see him. And he was on LBC the other day. I was trying to wake Piers up, actually, because I think Piers had been something extremely late. And I said, get onto LBC. Al Gore's on there. And apparently they let him waffle on as though he was an environmentalist, when his film, An Inconvenient Truth, which obviously had no truth in it, was taken apart by a judge. The judge stopped at 15 major errors. You can't say that polar bears are drowning. You can't say all the ice is melting when it's from a Hollywood movie. You know, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. And they've got that James O'Brien on there, who's the big change agent, the silver-tongued lizard, who let these people... No, these people are dangerous, though, because they are... Again, the Turkish vote for Christmas thing comes to mind, but I don't understand whether these people are just stupid or evil. I can't work it out now, because what they're doing is evil, and if they had any conscience, then they wouldn't be acting like that. So they've been mind controlled and brainwashed into this agenda, and they're spouting it as though it is the only reality.
Indeed. Freeman Sorry, Piers, can I just... Freeman Jack saying the social contract is where citizens exchange civil obedience for civil liberties. What do you say to that, Piers?
Yes. Although the liberties they're getting are defined, so maybe they're not liberties. But I think the general point he makes is very good. I think on Al Gore, I would recommend people come to our website, weatheraction.com, where I put up a challenge to Al Gore and the BBC to have a debate on what he claims, because it is nonsense. And we've had a lot of retweets on the tweet asking for that, and that is Twitter at Piers_Corbyn. So both of those things listeners might find interesting. I would describe Al Gore as the Goebbels of the 21st century, and he is a liar and he's evil. I don't think he's stupid, but I think him and the BBC rely on making people stupid in order to herd them around, and they use certain concepts to do that. Rather like in 1984, the book, all sorts of concepts are used to make people flip their views if the authorities flip them. And there was an example of a speech in there where the Big Brother was making a speech saying that we were on one side of some war or other between East Asia and Eurasia. In the middle of the speech, he flipped and changed to the other side. And then people all cheered as if whatever was said by the Big Brother was correct because of some argument he produced about a belief, which I've forgotten what it was. But one of the fundamental beliefs we have now is that carbon dioxide is bad. And carbon dioxide is bad is used to justify all sorts of things. Now, the truth is that carbon dioxide is the gas of life. Carbon dioxide is good. And if we had more carbon dioxide, farming would be more productive. When you double the amount of CO2, the product from plants such as tomatoes goes up by 40%. Yeah. And historically, over the last hundreds of millions of years, there was a lot more CO2 and more growth.
I think, Piers, that's a really good point, because what they're trying to do is reduce CO2 so they can reduce the amount of food grown. I mean, that was what will happen if they manage to reduce the amount of CO2. But they can't, because, of course, the sea controls it all, so they can't do that unless they lower the temperature of the sea. Well, that's just can't be done, because that's controlled by the sun. Yes, which is the thing that they don't mention very much when they talk about global warming. Yeah, I've just looked, social contract. Yes, what they've done is it seems that they have redefined the idea of social contract as a moral and political contract, and originating during the Age of Enlightenment. Now, I think we're in this new Age of Enlightenment, so what they're doing is they're redefining all these things in a very creepy way.
Yes.
The language that they're using is part of it, and I think everybody needs to get educated into this limited but very useful for them weaponized language, and realize when it's been used against them. Now, it's interesting what we were going to talk about just before the break. Like the German Advisory Council on Global Change. I think this was somebody who was listening a few weeks ago suggested I look at this, Tony, and it's very, very interesting. The WBGU recommends reducing CO2 emissions from fossil fuels to zero by 2070 at the latest. This policy goal is both ambitious and incisive because the zero target must be reached, by every country, every municipality, every company, and every citizen if the world as a whole is to become climate neutral. How the hell can the world become climate neutral? What a stupid thing to say. The group of 20 major industrialized and emerging economies, the G20, now needs to resolutely advance implementation of both agreements, seizing the opportunity of this, in brackets, great transformation to sustainability, as a unique modernization project that could offer substantial economic development opportunities. Well, it's going to offer substantial economic development opportunities to all of the corporations involved, obviously. Now, this gets really interesting. The head of their organization, the Secretary General, so in other words, it's a military post. This is also an important thing, like the Secretary General of the UN is a military post. Yeah,
right.
The Secretary General of this organization, in line with the UN and its hierarchy, this is from Berlin, 4th of July 2017, quoting, this is the woman, Maya Gopal will become the new Secretary General of the German Advisory Council on Global Change. Right, global change, not climate change, global change. Yeah, this is what's going to make us laugh, and this is what brings us back to the Green Gathering. Yeah, with a degree in media studies and a PhD in political economy, Gopal has worked extensively on the themes of globalization and sustainability, forward-thinking economies and forms of prosperity, as well as on the rights of future generations. Now, this is really interesting, yeah, because she was most recently been a director of the Berlin office of the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy. Until 2011, she worked for the World Future Council as Director of Future Justice. Now, this is creepy newspeak language. Future justice. Well, wait a minute. Justice is meant to be something that you can get all the time. Now, justice is in the present. It's not in the future. Why do we need justice in the future? Justice has to be in the present, right? So the World Future Council, the Future Justice Commission, is composed of World Future Council councillors, advisors, and selected experts from different fields of knowledge. Now, this goes into the EU thing, yeah? Because who elected these people? Who elected them? Nobody. They're just there because they've been mentored. That's the only reason they're there, right? There is no electoral process for these people. You can't find it on their website. The focus since 2012 has been primarily on a campaign to promote ombudspersons for future generations at all governance levels. All governance levels. Green Gathering again, isn't it? It goes into everything.
Yeah.
This has been due to specific funding. Specific funding. That's interesting, isn't it? So they're not telling you where the money's coming from or where it's going, as well as including the Rio and the G20 summit. Okay, now this is the Rio Earth Summit, yeah, which was an ideal, high-profile platform to promote this proposal. So all of this came out of the Rio Earth Summit 1992, same as Sustainable Development, same as Maurice Strong, Al Gore, all these criminals all got onto this bandwagon from the Rio Earth Summit. So this World Future Council of unelected people who may have a qualification in media studies and who are completely unelected has been around since then. And did you hear about this, Piers? I never heard about it.
No. I mean, what you're describing is like straight out of 1984, you know, the World Summoner of a Council. And
well, the lady who we're talking about, Maya Gopal, she is also a member of the Club of Rome. What a the Balaton Group and the Advisory Board of the Development and Peace Foundation, which is a globalization agency of the UN. So this is just amazing stuff. It's basically ties everything together, and then it goes into on their website. It's Advisory Council. Climate protection as a world citizen movement, right? So this is the Hitler Youth, right? It doesn't matter whether you call them Bolsheviks or the Hitler Youth or whatever you want to call them. Yeah. Climate protection as a world citizen movement, right? That's the thing. So,
but it's completely deranged. You see, look, it's what they're putting forward is a religion, right?
Yes.
And the science that they're so-called putting there is like Dr. Strangelove stuff. It's madness, complete madness, because the actual facts of CO2 production by mankind, men and women and all their machines, is that mankind produces 4% of the total CO2 production in the world, and 96% comes in and out of the sea, nature, plants dying, animals breathing, and so on. So the idea that man's CO2 can dominate the other 96% is a conspiracy of nature. It's completely insane, because the termites that produce 10 times man's CO2 are not going to suddenly produce CO2 just because a car drives past and not produce it if it doesn't. I mean, it's crazy. And in the end, you could reduce all man's CO2 to nothing, perhaps in theory, but you still got the men breathing, of course, which is quite a lot. But you see, if there's less CO2 produced, all that happens is that more comes out of the sea, because there's going to be a dynamic equilibrium depending on temperature between how much is in the sea, which is 50 times that on the air, and how much is in the air. So they could reduce CO2 production as much as they like, but all that will happen is that more comes out of the sea to make it up again.
Okay, Piers, it's my understanding that volcanic activity creates huge amounts of CO2, and it's also my understanding at the minute that we've got an increased amount of volcanic activity on the planet over the last couple of 100 years or so, and we used to have way back obviously an awful lot more volcanic activity, which is probably, in my guess, the reason why our CO2 levels were a lot higher going back thousands if not millions of years now, and why plants used to grow an awful lot bigger, and why they're still genetically made up to absorb more CO2. Because back to this point, I said it last week and I'll say it again because this is important. Anyone can check this. Every single plant grows to its first limiting factor, whether that's sunlight, nutrient, water, pH balance or whatever. But if you get all of those things right that you can more or less control, especially in a greenhouse or indoor environment, then CO2 needs to be injected for that plant to grow to its full potential, which you touched on earlier. And that can be checked by anyone. So what about this volcanic activity? Is that playing a part in what's happening today?
Well, yeah, I think there's, on all these things, there's quite a lot of factors. First of all, on the case of plants and CO2 concentration in the last few 100 million years, if you go back that time, then there was definitely a lot more CO2 around, and the atmosphere in the much earlier Earth did have huge amounts of CO2, like 10 times, 100 times even. I mean, there's arguments about whether it's 100 times, but a lot more than present. And that enabled very, very rapid plant growth and the dinosaurs to eat the plants and so forth. And at the same time, coal measures were being laid down. Now, because of the great efficiency of plants, we've got much less CO2. In fact, the levels now are equal to the lowest levels they've ever been in the last 100 million years. And the volcanoes, well, they weren't the ones that made more CO2 in the past. The CO2 was already there. Now, your question of do volcanoes produce a lot of CO2? Well, it depends on the volcanoes. If they're also destroying limestone, then they will produce a lot of CO2. If they're not, then they won't produce so much. So I think that's like open. You know, you have to look in the detail to argue that, but the main source of CO2 is at any one time is going to be the sea, and it's also the main sink of CO2 is the sea, because there's this equilibrium balance. So you could have volcanoes, like for 1 year, for the sake of argument, a lot of volcanoes, extra CO2, but that will go into the sea within a few years.
Okay, thanks for that.
So that would be my answer on that. But yeah, have a look at details of volcanoes in the sea. Now, it's true that there are more volcanoes around now, and big ones and big earthquakes. And this happens during periods of low solar activity. You get more big earthquakes and more volcanoes because the tectonic plates are not being knocked so much by solar activity and the solar wind, and stay stuck, except when there's a sudden impact from the solar wind due to an increase in activity from an otherwise quiet sun, and then you get bigger shifts. So you get quiet periods and bigger shifts, giving you bigger earthquakes at times and volcanoes. And this is shown statistically in historical data on earthquakes and world temperatures and solar activity. But you see, it's not the volcanoes making it cold, it's this solar activity making the world cold and also driving the volcanoes. And actually the extra volcanoes come after the increase in coldness.
Thank you, Piers. Nice explanation. I'll look deeper into that if I ever get any time. We need to try and get through these questions if we can, because
let's do that.
We've got one from Mithrin that came in early in the first half of the show. So do we have any idea how many years worth of coal we are sitting on? Sorry about that. Do we have any idea
years worth of what?
Of coal left in the ground?
Coal. Well, the last figures I were told was that there's hundreds of years of coal underneath Britain, which could be used to power the British economy. And there's no good reason why it isn't being used. Because coal can be made clean in the sense of the dust can be removed at the power stations by electrostatic conversions and so on. And that would make Britain energy self-sufficient instead of having to rely on Russian gas or French nuclear power, which requires, in the case of the nuclear power, monstrous activity in Mali and so forth, former French colonies, where the main reason why the French go in there, they say, to fight terrorism, is to secure their source of uranium.
Okay, nice. Stan wanted to know about hydrogen. Is that a viable source of energy?
Well, hydrogen, you have to get it from somewhere, and it comes from water, where you electrolyse the water. So you have to make electricity to get the hydrogen. So in terms of CO2 production, there's no saving by burning hydrogen, because you've already had to have the coal, or nuclear, of course, but there's other problems with nuclear power. But you've already had to produce the hydrogen and the oxygen by electrolytic process, which requires energy and CO2 production. If you burn the hydrogen in a vehicle in the city, then of course it produces much less smoke or anything like that. So it is cleaner in the sense of what you're going to breathe than anything else. So in that case, it's a good thing. But don't think you're saving CO2 by doing it. You're just making cleaner air, which is a good thing. But there will be some other form of pollution elsewhere by depending how you're producing the electricity.
Okay, nice one, thank you. Kev said earlier that he was at the Green Gathering years ago. Redirect Action and a couple of American Green ladies took over and steered energy in a total different direction using the Delphi method, but he didn't know that at the time.
Right. So, hey, do you know when this was, Tony? Have you got a year for that?
I don't know. Maybe hopefully Kev's still listening in the chat and he'll let us know when that was.
Get him to let us know, because I was talking to Nick Colstrom about this, because he used to go there a lot, and he said that it was shut down. It was between 5 and 10 years ago when they had this huge policing bill and they had to change the security arrangements. It basically bankrupted the festival. So I'd be really interested in that, because I think it's actually a good thing to go into now, the history of this, how it was taken over and where we are now within it.
Yep. Sam says that Ecotricity and Good Energy are two of the main sponsors of the Green Gathering.
I didn't know that, because on their website... No, it's interesting. It's on their website. It hasn't really got sponsors. I'll have to just check that again and go through it. But I couldn't find much on their website. And also the thing about the Green Gatherings, they don't really put much out. I mean, their YouTube channel seems to stop at 2015, I think, or is it 20? I think it's 2015. And it's just people, it's just pictures of people sort of wandering about. There's nothing of any substance to their videos, so they don't state anything, which is actually quite suspicious in a way, because if you're a funded organisation or a charitable trust, which is what they are, then you have to present a very clear view of what you're about It has to be clearly defined. In other words, you can't let people make assumptions about what you are. You have to clearly define them. But what they seem to be doing is they're clearly defining them only when you come up against their assumptions, which is not the way it should work.
Well, apparently, ecotricity and good energy, they use wind power, and Piers Talk outed the flaws, and that'll be why they didn't want you to talk, apparently, according to Sam. Cheers for your contribution, Sam.
Well spotted, mate. I think we should look into closely what people who promote ecotricity, what they define it as. Okay, as I said, if it's about wind, then that is about killing birds and mining a lot of metal, which is used to making these wind turbines. If it's about solar power, again, it means stopping the use of land, wasting it, and again, the rare earths used to make the semiconductors in solar power, of course, involves huge exploitation of child labour in the Congo and so forth. So that has to be looked into. If it means nuclear power, then, well, we know again, of course, that people in mining uranium don't have a long life at all. So, what does ecotricity mean?
Well, I'm on their website right now.
Right.
It's a company, yeah. And
Britain's greenest energy company, putting the bee back in Britain, as in bees which are dying anyway. So it's very strange. It says sustainability is in our DNA. That's a creepy thing to say, isn't it? So sustainability. So in other words, this program...
We'll have to genetically modify you to make it possible.
Well, yeah, because it's like having a microchip. It's like saying that the UN's Agenda 21 language is in our DNA. That's what it's actually saying. That's interesting. Sustainability is in our DNA. The electric highway, we've just changed how you use our petrol pumps. Oh, so they seem to be involved with electric cars. I'm going to have to look through this site. Well, thanks very much for putting it to us, because it's got recommended by Friends of the Earth, Amnesty International, RSPB, Giving Nature a Home, WOMAD Festival, and the Vegan Society. It doesn't actually say...
Vegan? Jesus, yes. That's a shame, isn't it? What about Greenpeace? Are they in the list?
No, Friends of the Earth are.
Right.
Let's go into this a bit, because it's an odd site. Yes, so they are an energy company. Well, they've got an 08,000 number. Yeah, it's interesting. I think we'll have to look into this a bit more.
Definitely. I think Friends of the Earth being there is interesting, because, of course, they used to be in the 70s and 80s totally anti-nuclear.
Yes.
And I suspect this ecotricity probably includes nuclear power. But I think we should go back to that point I made about electricity bills. We should give people a choice on the type of electricity they're prepared to pay for. Now, personally, if given the choice, I would pay only to have coal-produced electricity, or maybe some water power, but I would not pay anything to have wind or solar. So I think I should be given the choice of my electricity bill. And those people who want to pay for wind, then they should have higher electricity bills. And if we do that, I'd like to see just if people will put their money where their mouths are or not.
It says here, this is ecotricity. We've got the history going back to about 1997, basically, of wind power. It says, our new wind park at Dalby in Leicestershire is fully up and running, generating 20 million units of electricity, which will power over 5,000 homes a year. Doesn't say for how long. We installed new windmills at the RSPB's lodge headquarters near Sandy. So what they
RSPB's lodge headquarters?
A load of birds. So the RSPB are going to be really pissed off with them.
But the RSPB are behind it. I mean, the RSPB is a totally corrupt organisation, I would say, which is acting against its own declared purposes. I mean, it's beyond belief. It's a very 1984 setup. But these people that are saying it produces X amount of power, well, they've got to say, where does the power come from when the wind isn't blowing? And the answer is, it's coal or it's maybe nuclear. But whatever. We've gone into that, but these people never discuss that.
Yeah, it's quite scary stuff, this. Well, thanks to the people who are pointing this stuff out, because this, as Tony was saying, is a huge spider's web, and it keeps unraveling. If they're involved with the green gathering, it kind of makes sense. But what we're talking about here is a very dangerous situation, because we haven't got much time left with this show, but these things that I'm finding everywhere, and this draconian way things are being shut down, and it's in the past couple of years. This has happened to the Keep Talking group over the past couple of weeks. They've been shut down twice. It's a group of old age pensioners, and Piers has given a talk there, who have been hijacked and basically been pushed into being portrayed as right wing and anti-Semitic and basically like Nazis. These are old age pensioners who meet up to talk about history, and we're going to talk about this next week, Tony, because it's absolutely unbelievable what's happened with that group. I mean, it's beyond what you could make up. I mean, what's happened to me and Piers here is nothing compared to what's happening to them, and all they do is meet up and talk about things. So it's really crazy. But this climate protection as a world citizen movement. Now they quote here, this is a good thing maybe to wrap up on, Piers. It goes into the IPCC and our...
you should advertise what we're doing this weekend as well.
Yes, we're going to be speaking at the Sunrise Festival in Kent Church in Hereford. Round near Hereford. Monmouth, actually. Near Monmouth. Between Monmouth and Hereford, really. Kent Church, yes.
And we're speaking on a Sunday evening, right?
That's right.
8:30 onwards, we're both going to be on.
Yes, and that's with these great people who tried to get us on at the Green Gathering, and then all this controversy kicked in, and of course we keep them out of it because they've acted completely honourably. And the great thing that they did was to say that if the Green Gathering had a problem with me and Piers, they'd have to tell us directly, which was an extremely good way of handling it. So it put the onus back on them. Not that they did, really, or respond to anything we've said. That's the whole point. They've failed to respond to a very detailed document that we sent them, which is actually quite funny. And you can hear it, if you don't want to read it, you can hear it on our YouTube show. We've played half of it tonight. It's in the second half. You can find it on YouTube there, The Green Gathering. And it's our latest video on windowsontheworld.net and also Windows on the World YouTube channel. But to finish off, Piers, I'd like you to respond to this, because this is what this propaganda arm of the UN are spouting constantly, okay?
Yep.
Here it starts. The fifth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change makes it unmistakably clear unacceptable climate consequences, which are likely to escalate beyond the 2 degrees C guardrail, can only be avoided if further increase in greenhouse gas concentrations are halted as soon as possible. The WBGU therefore recommends reducing CO2 emissions from fossil fuels to zero by 2070 at the latest. What have you got to say to these people, please?
It's total Dr. Strangelove madness. Because if you reduce the amount of CO2 produced by mankind, all that will happen is more of it comes out of the sea. The claim that doubling CO2 will increase temperatures by 2 degrees C is not borne out by any historical facts. What happens is that CO2 levels change in response to temperatures. What we have now is world temperatures going down, but because they've been going down, the authorities have adjusted temperatures upwards in the present and downwards in the past. They admit they're doing this and say the adjustment gives a better representation of reality or something. Of course, it's not. But people should go on to Steve S. Goddard Twitter account and see the details in which he's gone to show actual measurements and then the so-called adjusted measurements which the American authorities and World Meteorological Organization produce in order to make people feel as if something is happening when it is not. So I would say it is complete Dr. Strangelove science and should be opposed totally. And what we should do actually is have more CO2, not less. CO2 is the gas of life. And the talk I'm going to give on a Sunday, 8:30 or thereabouts, is going to be called The Global Warming Hoax, True Green versus Fake Green, and the Future of the World.
Well, that's great, Piers. I'm going to be talking about the post-truth world, which means talking about incessantly for the past 8 or 9 weeks, and everything is interconnected. We talk about connecting the dots. Well, I think we've been doing it, really. I'd just like to read out this paper. Well, I'm not going to read the whole paper, but I'm going to do the summary of the paper. It says, new insights on the physical nature of the atmospheric greenhouse effect deduced from an empirical planetary temperature model by Ned Nikoloff and Carl Zeller.
Ah, superb.
Yeah, the paper argues that concentrations of CO2 and other supposed greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have virtually no effect on the Earth's temperature. They conclude the entire greenhouse gas theory is incorrect. Instead, the Earth's greenhouse effect is a function of the sun and atmospheric pressure, which results from gravity and the mass of the atmosphere, rather than the amount of greenhouse gases such as CO2 and water vapor in the atmosphere. The same is true for other planets and moons with a hard surface, the authors contend, pointing to the temperature and atmospheric data of various celestial bodies collected by NASA. Please don't say NASA lie about everything and the Earth's flat on that one, please, because now, so we do know they lie, and both me and Piers are in general agreement that we didn't go to the moon. So let's not get into that one. So precise is the formula. The authors of the paper told the WND that by using it, they were able to correctly predict the temperature of other celestial bodies not included in their original analysis. The prevailing theory on the Earth's temperature is that heat from the sun enters the atmosphere, and then greenhouse gases such as CO2, methane and water vapor trap part of that energy by preventing it from escaping back into space. That theory, which underpins the anthropogenic global warming hypothesis and the climate models used by the UN, was first proposed and developed in the 19th century. However, the experiments on which it was based involved glass boxes that retain heat by preventing the mixing of air inside the box with air outside the box. Quote here, the truth about global warming is no further than the WND Superstore, where ClimateGate, the greatest hoax, and more publications are available. So that's a little ad for them. It's in there, the WND Superstore. The experiment is not analogous. Sorry, I've just scrolling down here. The experiment is not analogous to what occurs in the real atmosphere, which does not have walls or a lid, according to Nikolov and Zeller. The new paper, headlined New Insights on the Physical Nature of the Atmospheric Greenhouse Effect, deduced from an empirical planetary temperatures model, argues that greenhouse theory is incorrect. Read more at www.wnd.com/2017/07. Study blows greenhouse theories out of the water. So there you go.
Well, that's excellent stuff by Ned and Carl. And as a matter of fact, in the last few years, the temperatures of all the planets has gone up at the same time as Earth. All of them driven by increased solar activity. I mean, most of them or all of them have started to go down now, but they did all go up pretty well together, which shows that it's the sun what does it, not CO2.
And actually, I'd like to also put in, Piers, that the website, which is the propaganda arm of the Green Gathering, buys into the cows farting theory. States some research suggesting livestock and their byproducts alone contribute between 18 and 50% of all global greenhouse gases. What do you say to that?
Well, there's a lot of talk about cows farting, but objectively, they couldn't be driving the climate, because, you see, America used to be covered in bison who were farting like hell for thousands of years before the English turned up and killed them all, or most of them, and most of the Indians as well. So whatever the methane was doing, it wasn't actually warming the planet. Now, their own theory of greenhouse gases and how they're supposed to work is incorrect. And on Sunday, if we have time, we can go into exactly why it is incorrect. We know what does happen. I've explained that a bit. We can explain why their theory doesn't work. But what happens to methane is another question, because if all these cows are farting, then there should be a lot more methane in the atmosphere, but there isn't. And the reason is that methane does burn very slowly on sand surfaces, where the methane is converted by a sort of catalytic process on the surface of the sand with oxygen into carbon dioxide and water. So it disappears, and more methane in the air doesn't last that long.
That's very good stuff, Piers. And I'd just like to go into, in the last few minutes, some of this draconian fake green taxation policy and control, which is hitting us in the newspapers every day now.
Yeah.
This one was from, I think, the Daily Mail. If you drive your children to the school gates, then you could be forced to pay a fine under the new initiative. Multiple fines are being introduced for cars around schools across the UK in a bid to lower pollution, improve safety and reduce congestion. Croydon, London, is the latest to impose these school-run restrictions on drivers and parents. These restrictions are also a part of a larger scheme to encourage more families to walk or cycle to school. Well, how can everyone walk or cycle to school? They can't, can they?
No.
I mean,
no.
because
They're in the space. Well, the distances, come on, I mean, some of them have to go a long way.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
From September, approach roads to 3 primary schools in Croydon will become pedestrian zones over a trial period of 6 months. The trial period. It's not a trial period. It's just the implementation. And they say the consensus is done. The science is settled. There is no argument, and everybody agrees. In fact, up to 65% of the people in the area will agree, I think you'll find. This is what happened in Waltham Forest with the green agenda of Mini Holland, which has now turned Waltham Forest into an open concentration camp. If you don't believe me, go to Walthamstow Village, and on the other side of Walthamstow Village, between Wood Street and Shernhall Street, it is an open concentration camp. You can't get in or out. And I told them that was what was going to happen, which is why I escaped when I... It says, yes, this is it. See, these zones will be in operation for between 90 minutes and 2 hours daily before and after school, when the volume of vehicles in the area are at their peak. Well, that's obvious. Certain exemptions will be made for teachers, residents and visitors to the school, as long as a free advance access permit. It's all 1984 stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's control. But it's in the name of complete fiction that CO2 is bad. I mean, it's a nonsense. It's a religion. It's just like saying Big Brother has said, therefore we must do it. And that's what happened in 1994.
This is what the whole show's about, isn't it? This is what the whole show tonight is about. And it is another one for you. The report on the Green Party by Greenwatch. Greenwatch is very good. Go on Facebook and look at some of their stuff. They're always posting very interesting articles. Ties into the censorship and lunacy of the fake green fascists running events and in positions of power as change agents for global governments under climate change fraud and mentoring into global control and taxation under the fake green agenda. That's my press say for this. And a shocking new policy announcement. UK Green Party co-leader Jonathan Bartley has revealed that his party would introduce measures to keep tabs on everyone's travel, even on your summer holiday.
What?
Under his policy, those who fly more would face increasingly higher charges in the name of the environment. This would be added on top of existing green taxes on flights, which currently see holidaymakers pay up to £450 extra. In order to enforce this policy, Bartley and his green lobby cronies would have to introduce a system that tracked every single person's flight history. And now we are seeing from the BBC what a great idea it is to have a microchip. So this is all where it's going. But this shutdown on flying is absolutely terrible because we should be able to travel when we want to. And we don't get cheap airline flights anymore. It costs a fortune because of this green nonsense that they're imposing. And if I have money, I want to travel. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And why would people want to stop other people travelling? It says the policy itself is backed by a campaign group called A Free Ride, who believe that yes, a free. Oh yes. No irony at all, a free ride, who believe that the best thing for the climate would be if everyone were to stop flying immediately. And Barclays co-leader Caroline Lucas once said that Brits flying to Spain was as bad as knifing a person in the street. Now, these people are mentally ill. And under the Mental Health Act, if you made that under a Mental Health Act in front of the police or any other authority, they probably would have you sectioned.
It's unbelievable. You see, as I said, the facts are that all mankind CO2 is only 4% of the total, and whatever you do with it, it can it can't be changed, because the sea surface temperatures will control what happens, and there'll be a delayed effect anyway over centuries. But in the long run, the sea runs the show, and the sun rules the sea temperatures.
Absolutely. Have you got anything to say, Tony, before we wrap up? Anything you want to ask?
Nothing about that. There's a few things I need to add. I've got loads of questions for Piers, so hopefully he'll come back on another show. We don't have time for him tonight.
Sure, great stuff.
But we'll get you back another time. But I wanted to mention Freeman Jack and his website, freemanjack.net. His show goes out on a Thursday night. It's called The Psycho Nautilus, and I'm going to send you a couple of pods of Jack's, Piers, because...
Sure, we'll advertise them on Weather Action.
Well, I want you to listen to what he's saying, because he's got some really good ideas that I think you'll be interested in, and he's been in the chat tonight agreeing with everything what you're saying, and he lives pretty close to you as well, so that'd be a nice little chat for you to have, I think. And people ought to check out his last couple of pods, because they were on energy and types of energy, and how we might make different sorts of energy from what we've got, with less burden to everything, really, our resources.
Sure.
So I'll put you on that way.
Thank you.
I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to say thanks to everyone for contributing in the chat tonight. And hopefully we'll see a few more in next week. It is building up a little bit in the chat. A lot of people seem afraid to get in there. I don't know whether it's a time issue or whether they don't have anything to say or whatever, but we could do with a few more people contributing in there. It would be nice, and what we do get out of the chat helps the shows go along, because we're getting a good feedback of what it is that people out there are thinking, what it is you know. Also, the sponsors page was posted by Freeman Jack. I've sent that to Mark there in Skype, but that's the sponsors of the Green Gathering. If I'm going to put this in the post as well, the link to it, so people listening to the pod of this, you can check it out, and if you've got any information on any of those sponsors for us, that would be really handy, because we are short of manpower or women power, person power in Newspeak, right? We've got to use Newspeak, right? And we're short of that. So any research that people have already done or can do for us, we'd be really grateful for that, and your contributions. So anyone got anything else want to finish up with?
Apart from the fact that I think that people should go for these Green Gathering Committee and ask them questions. I think as many people as possible should be asking them really serious things. Have a listen to the show we did and the questions that we put to them, which they basically ignored. They ignored us. I gave them several chances to remedy, and the arrogance of these people is unbelievable. I'm on a charitable trust now, and if you don't answer the public, you can get into big trouble. You have to be available to the public. You're there for the public. These people are public servants. They're meant to be serving us, and it looks as though they're part of this switched off change agent elite who are just basically being fed crap by lobbyists, and they are allowing themselves to be useful idiots. And this is what we need to do: take these useful idiots down, because they are a danger to the people, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Yep, I agree with that. And I would say, people, if you've got time, pop onto weatheraction.com, read what we say about Al Gore, and do whatever you can to force the BBC, or indeed any other channel, LBC, Channel 4, ITV, to have a proper discussion about the CO2 con.
Yeah, when you stifle freedom of speech and stop a debate, there's no science in that. Surely there's
no science at the Royal Society, Tony, because Piers turfed out of there as well when he was welcome at one point, weren't you?
Yes. Well, they had one discussion, I remember. They would let us talk, but there was, when you read the minutes of the meeting, which is meant to be a recording of all the discussions, certainly the key points, none of us who had raised oppositional questions were mentioned at all. That is the Royal Society, and that is bad.
That's very bad.
Okay, right, we've overrun a little bit, but I'm sure we'll be back for more of this and, different subjects. There's a few more about. So cheers, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Cheers, Piers. Cheers, Mark. Have a good week.
Thank you.